Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So, my guest today is Jacob Gunter. Jacob is a Bay Area actor who currently works as a server and a receptionist. He's very grateful for his family and friends and the incredible impact they've had on his life. His pronouns are he, him, his. Thanks so much, Jacob. I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you, Tiffany. I'm happy to be here.
Yes. So I was thinking back to when we met, which actually doesn't take too much thinking because we met more more like in the recent past. And I guess it's been a few months now. Has it been?
Yeah, I believe we met in October, if I remember correctly.
Oh, that's interesting. It does seem a lot longer ago. I think because we just became friends really quickly and we
Yeah.
have a lot of the same things that interest us. I know that it's been mostly around like wellness, health and well-being, energy healing work, and yeah, I've enjoyed so many times that we've been able to chat and connect and share about our reflections on the world. I think you and I are pretty open with each other about what we see going on in the world, the challenges, struggles, the positives.
Definitely. Yeah, I agree with that a lot. I've really enjoyed the conversations that we've had um, after we've met and all that. So I'm excited to be here and I'm excited to continue the conversation.
Fabulous. So, yeah, let's chat about the idea of shame. And as it relates to men, I think it can be very challenging to admit mistakes, to admit faults. And I'm curious about your own experiences with admitting when maybe you haven't done things as well as you would have liked to, or haven't been as thoughtful, or hurt someone's feelings. Talk about how that's worked for you in terms of exploring and practicing with being open and honest, because I know that that's something that is important to you, to be open to admitting your mistakes or learning from your mistakes and maybe admitting to fault. So I'm curious what that's been like for you.
Yeah, honesty is really important to me. Um, for me, I think that being able to open up, be vulnerable, and um, own up to mistakes or own up to things that ways that I feel like I've hurt others. That's how I learn how to do better and how to not hurt others in the future and how to like have better interactions. Because usually, like when I have hurt somebody, like hurt a friend or something, it was not intentional. I didn't go out and say, I want to hurt my friend. It's like it was a mistake. And so it was either miscommunication, misunderstanding, or I didn't consider their feelings when I did something.
Right. And because I know that that's a hard thing to do, the admitting of when we haven't done something well or when we've hurt someone's feelings. That's hard for anyone to do. In general, I think it's a challenge. But I'm curious from your standpoint as a man, what do you see around you in terms of others, other men, and how they handle these kind of situations where they maybe have a harder time, or maybe they don't. Maybe the people around you, the men around you, don't have a harder time admitting, when they've made a mistake or when they've, yeah, just haven't done their best. And
Yeah.
I'm curious what you've witnessed in terms of kind of the males in your life, in your realm. And yeah, I'm just curious if this is something that is a challenge for a lot of men.
So within my friend group and the people that I'm close to, um, there are certain men who are more stubborn than others and who find it a lot more difficult to open up and share their feelings. With with them, I feel like you have to just be open and straight up and just tell them directly, like, hey, you hurt my feelings. Like what you said wasn't okay. And then they can either own up to it or they'll jokingly just pass it off and be like, okay, whatever, like, just move on. Which I've had both experiences. I definitely experienced where they're like, oh, I didn't realize that that would have hurt you. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And the other side of it is people who don't want to admit that they did something wrong because they admit they did something wrong that they aren't able to uh, means that they weren't right and they always want to be right because I believe that there's like this stigma, a social stigma that men have to always be right all the time. And so in that regard, if you admit that you weren't right, then you're breaking that social stigma, you know?
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm really curious where men and maybe it's boys learn to not share their feelings, not discuss maybe when a
Mm.
situation went awry with another person. What is that something that you're taught as like a little boy? Is it directly taught or is it kind of come out of other behaviors that are being presented to little boys in your experience? Or yeah, that would be helpful to understand more.
Well, so growing up, I noticed that uh, a lot of my friends and people, I mean, even myself, we were treated where we shouldn't have emotions, you know? Like for me, I was very lucky to have parents that harnessed um, and promoted love and, openness and to be able to understand who you are and like what you feel inside. But I've definitely experienced a lot of either teachers or parental figures and all that. And they have the idea that guys and men shouldn't show emotion. So they have like the idea of like, hey, be a man, like come on, stand up, stop crying, be a man, and get back out there. So it's if you get hurt, like even as a kid, they have that idea. And I've seen um, friends who are parents, and that's how they were taught when they were a kid. So that's what they do for their kids now. You know, um,
So is it
and
that
when
they
I was,
don't is it that don't they don't want them to show emotion. They want them to be like self-contained, um,
well, to be strong, and so they think
strong.
that like, so the idea behind it is that if you're showing emotions, then you're letting yourself be vulnerable, and so you can't face the challenges that you need to face. Because
Hmm.
so many challenges in life aren't faced in an emotional way; they're faced in a logical way, in like a mentally strong way. And so when a parent is trying to teach their kid on how to handle a situation, they're trying to teach them like, hey, don't be emotional about it. But they're not saying it that way, and so it definitely could be worded better. But what they're telling them is like, don't feel, be a man, grow up, and get out there.
Okay.
If that makes
And
sense.
it does. And so you're connecting that to where it takes men when they're older and not and the challenge that they may have with
Yeah. So
talking.
so so this line of thinking. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So this line of thinking ultimately, I think, can be very damaging the way that you go about it, because I do think that there are times when you shouldn't um, feel emotional about a subject or situation, and you have to have a straight, like um, a straight, like your head screwed on straight, And I think that when you bring emotion into certain decisions, it won't help you get to where you want to be. Now, that's not going for everything. There's definitely situations where adding emotion to it adds that extra care and that love that will make it more valuable, I would say. Because I think that our emotional side is such a valuable aspect that we are so willing to throw away or to push aside because we're taught that we shouldn't have that aspect. So instead of understanding when to use our emotions and when not to, it's very common for guys growing up to experience that you just shouldn't feel anything at all, no emotions, because it's very easily taught that emotions are weak.
Right. Yep. That's what I've heard, at
And
least
so
from.
yeah, and so like falling into like I was part of an event back when I was in high school called Challenge Day, and within Challenge Day, the idea was to challenge social stigmas and to challenge the current ideals that people currently have. And one idea that they had was two metaphors, which were the be a man box and the be a lady flower. And so the idea is that in the be a man box is that you're stuck in this box, and everything that you're told, like be a man, don't cry, don't feel emotions, emotions are weak, like don't be weak, be strong, you know. And so you're so fit into this box that um, you aren't able to really go out. That like men touching other men, hugging other men, you know, being affectionate with other men is seen as unacceptable. And that's kind of part of being in that box is that like the idea is that if you like for me I'm a very affectionate, very like friendly person, and so with me and my friends like we all hug each other, you know, not with COVID right now. With COVID it's all different,
Hmm.
but previous to COVID, um we hug each other. My brother, I live with my brother, and every time I say goodbye to him I give him a hug. So like it's a matter of uh, there are guys out there who do not want to be seen as gay, so they won't do certain things like hug guys. They won't like. First of all, like it's not bad to be anywhere in the LGBTQ community. You know, I'm a supporter. I'm a straight male, and that's how I identify. But I don't think it's wrong to be outside of that. You know, and so I think that in this culture, so many people do believe that it is wrong to be outside of being a straight individual.
So I'm curious, because you are a male who's more affectionate and more willing to be open to talk about things that maybe bother you, or conversations you've had with people that have, I don't know, maybe just uh, concerned you in a way where you had to speak up and say, I didn't like that, or this didn't make me comfortable. Since you do seem to operate more in the realm of someone who is in touch with their emotions and willing to express that, what has that done for the people in the relationships in your life? How do you think there's a different experience that you and your friends or your family have because you're willing to be more open? Like, do they welcome it because they know you and they care about you? Or and do you have conversations about your affection? I'm curious.
That's a good question. Thank you for asking that. Um, I would say I believe that it's only improved my relationships. I think that to be able, because the thing is that I'm not going to be affectionate with someone who doesn't want that affection.
Mm,
Like, I'll still be affectionate in like an emotional way, and like I'll care about them and how they feel and like what's going on in their head, and I'll be sensitive to how I interact with them in certain situations, certain topics. Sorry. Um, so I'll be sensitive about how I interact with them with certain subject and certain topics, and um, but I won't like physically touch them if they don't like that kind of interaction, and that's okay. Like you don't have to have that. Um, I have some friends who, you know, as a guy, they're just so uh, people are so afraid to touch them because of one reason or another that they just are afraid of being rejected, or they just, you know, guys don't usually, like I said earlier, they don't touch each other. And so for me to like be talking to a friend about a sensitive subject and to like put my hand on their arm or on their back as like a means of comfort when they're opening up to me or something like that, I think that that really benefits and enhances the quality of the conversation that we've had, you know. And having for myself to have that openness of having platonic touch amongst friends, it's really a matter of when to do it and how you do it. But
mm.
um, you know, if it's rejected, it's rejected. It's okay. Like I don't mean to invade anyone's personal bubble. But if it's accepted and they do want that platonic touch, then they're able to dive deeper into how they feel. And with certain guy friends that I've had, they've been able to dive so much deeper into their emotions because I believe it just harnesses that trust, you know. And
Yes.
I think it's so difficult for men to feel warm and affectionate towards others because they lack platonic touch, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. Hmm, that's an interesting insight.
Yeah.
So
That's-
if
yeah.
so how I'm curious, how do men ever take account for things that they've haven't done well, if they've made a mistake, if they've offended someone, if they weren't as sensitive or thoughtful as they could have been, or even if it's not so much about an emotional uh, like reaction or responsibility, but if someone, if a man just, didn't do something well, dropped the ball, wasn't reliable, in your experience, is that, again, even if it's not so much about the emotional part of it, but is that easy or challenging for men to admit to in your experience?
I mean,
Does
I
that
think
make
it's
sense what I'm
challenging
asking?
for, if I understand correctly, I mean, I think it's challenging for everyone.
It
I think
is.
the idea of like admitting fault and admitting that you were wrong, it really, especially in a culture such as this one where business is such like an entire like in such a important aspect of it. Like I was at work, um, working at Starbucks, and um, woman comes in. I forget what her name was. I think it was like we'll call her Lucy for the sake of the story. So she comes in and she says her name is Lucy. It's like a call latte. So we make it, and then we call out call latte for Lucy and put it on the counter. And then woman walks up, looks at the cup, and then she keeps standing there waiting. And about like 10 minutes goes by. We call the name once or twice again, and there's only one person there waiting for a drink. There's no line. And so obviously it's hers. And so we ask her, like, hey, is this your drink? And she says, no, I don't think so. And we were like, oh, how, like, what did you order? She said, tall latte. And I was like, this is a tall latte. What's your name? Lucy. This is for Lucy. And she said, no, my name is spelled Lucie, not Lucy. And so it was like, okay, well, there was no clarification for how you spelled your name when we wrote it down. So we wrote it down how we best guessed to. Like, and so we said we
Hmm.
could remake the drink for you, but this was yours. And she was like, well, that's not my name, so that's not my drink.
Hmm.
And so it's like, instead of accepting the idea of what it was, she wanted it to be exactly correct to her standards. And
Right.
so um, I think that in that regard, also it shows that we want to be right, and
Hmm.
it's very common for people to not only, I think certain people fall into the trap, and I haven't seen this with any like specific category of people, but I think just certain individuals, just their idea of I'm right if you are wrong, you know. And so I think that as humans we make that mistake, is to fall into the trap of if the negative is true, that proves the positive.
Right.
When you can both be right. I was right in writing the name Lucy, and the drink was hers, but the she didn't recognize that as her name, so she was also right in the regard.
Hmm.
And so we just remade the drink for her with no name written on the cup and said, "Here you go." And then she went and had a great day. I hope. But
Hmm.
um, it's moments like that where like you really wonder like at what point is admitting fault okay and not okay, you know?
Yeah.
Because for me it
Yes.
made no difference to remake the drink, as Starbucks policy states, is that if someone's unhappy with their drink or you make it incorrectly or whatever happens, the idea is to make the customer happy. They're
Right.
a guest in the store. So if you have to remake a drink for a situation like that, drink was already cold by that point. So
Yeah.
what can you do?
Got to have another one. Right. Okay. Yes, I agree with you. I do think it's a human challenge, right? To admit fault or to recognize that you when you might have just rubbed someone the wrong way or treated them in a way that wasn't thoughtful or sensitive. It's not easy. Absolutely. I think I'm asking also about from the standpoint of a male because I don't have that much insight. I have a lot of insight into female culture and
True, that's true.
because women do share and talk, we always have to talk about stuff that's bothering us. And I don't mean that in any mocking way. I love it because there's just so much more to learn. We learn from each other as women. We help support each other through challenges. I mean, there certainly can be codependency and enabling that happens with some people because they may not have the tools to help support in a more empowering way. But my experience on the whole is that while it is challenging to admit fault, to admit when you made a mistake, when someone else was involved, um, I think that women are more, in my experience, more open to exploring that, especially if it's someone who you've known for a while. It's different when it's a
So
Lucy because you don't know them, right? But when
that's
it's
true.
someone who you have a relationship with, you have history with, you care for their well-being, then I think that for some reason in my observation, women, they can just get over the hump of like, okay, I know that wasn't so great what I did, or I wasn't as thoughtful as I could have been. Can we talk? Can we figure this out? Like, there's just so much that can come from that sort of interaction and that honesty and that truth. And there's support and trust that grows. And so I think that that's my experience, right? And
Definitely,
not, and
definitely.
again, that's not my experience with every female. And I certainly haven't mastered that kind of process, but
Mhm.
I have a lot more insight into that because I think on a whole in my life, I've spent more times with women than I have men in terms of close personal relationships. I've had some close male relationships, but not as many as female relationships. So that's why I'm asking, oh, what is it like? I'm so curious when men struggle, or do they always struggle? Maybe they don't always struggle with admitting fault and, mistakes and sort of battling that shame process of
Definitely,
because the shame
definitely.
takes us all down for sure. Once you go there, once you believe, I'm a bad person. I did that. It was awful what I did. Or, you know, I, I really, nobody likes me or whatever it is, or that situation caused me to, just be like not seen as in a great light. So yes, we all struggle with that, but I just don't know for men. I'm curious what in your experience, what that's looked like for men. Is it really hard for them to open up and admit fault, admit mistake? Do they? And I guess it does depend on the kind of relationship, obviously, we're talking about.
So
So,
I think I understand the question better now.
yeah, okay, good.
And I would say that from my experience, um, I find that it's a lot easier for men to talk to other men about how they made a mistake with someone else, like within a relationship, for example.
Hmm.
I don't know how many texts I've received or given or calls or whatever where it was like, dude, I think I made a mistake. Like, I think I messed up. And then at that point, we talk to each other and we try and figure out what the best way to move forward is. If it is like did you really make a mistake or what really happened there, and then you just talk it through with the people that you're most comfortable and confident with. And so for me, like, yeah, I've definitely had guy friends where they did make a mistake and they're not ready to talk about it with their partner yet because they're still dealing with that shame and understanding like that they made that mistake. And then when they are ready to really discuss that and move forward and address it, I think that that's when they bring it up to their partner. But I think that I've experienced that. I mean, I can only really speak for men and for the friends that I have. But I feel like that goes. My best guess is that that goes both ways. Is that we talk to our friends first before we really address it to our partner. And I know that that's what I do personally. I talk to someone that I really trust. If I made a mistake and I realize that like I have to own up to it,
Mm,
I will own up to it because it's not right to just leave that in the air. So I discuss it and I say, hey man, like how do I fix this? And usually that does come down to, hey, like you realize that you messed up, talk to her, have the conversation. And then at that point, they either choose to or don't choose to. And usually when they choose not to talk to her to solve it or fix it or to own up to the mistake they made, that starts to harness mistrust and an unhealthiness within themselves, which starts to leak out into the relationship in general.
right.
And that goes with friends and family and relation and romantic relationships as well. You know, it's just like where like you could I think it's also different with like your family. I have sisters, and so to be able to address something with a sister, it's a lot easier for me to say, hey, um, I'm sorry I did this, or hey, I was hurt when you did that, as opposed to a friend or someone I'm in a romantic relationship with. Someone I'm in a romantic relationship with, it's harder for me to on my own recognize, think through it, and then have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, that's encouraging to me though, what you just shared. If that's your experience with other men, because sometimes I think there's this belief, or maybe it's a little bit of a myth, that men like just don't open up ever and talk about their feelings, especially not with other men, let alone with anyone else. I guess when
Yeah,
you're in a romantic relationship, whether it's with a male or female, then yes, it's more complicated. So maybe you do need to have a sounding board, but there's hopefully some emotional currency there. But just in terms of friends, like guy friends or males who hang out together, it's like that. I think there's sort of like this belief on the street that like men, they do not, they don't open up, they don't share. So if what you shared is your experience, I was like, oh, that's actually more encouraging than was imagining.
I appreciate that. And the other side of it too is that there are times when we just also don't realize that we made the mistake.
Mm,
We don't realize that would have hurt somebody else. So I've also had friends come up to me and they say, "Hey," and they're telling a story like, "Oh, hey, I did this, this, and that," and then I've had to tell them like, "Hey, are you sure that was the right thing to do? Like, that doesn't like, how did so and so feel about this? Like, how did they feel when you said that, or how did um, your girlfriend or romantic partner react when they found out?" And they're like, "Oh, I didn't talk to them. Like, why is that even like something I need to talk to them about?" And so it also comes down to like the people that you interact with in your own social circles to be able to address how you are acting within your own relationship. Like, I'm not my friend's keeper, and I'm not going to make him do whatever I think he should do. Like, that's totally up to him. But the people that I keep close to, and people that I interact with personally, they're people who have the morals and have the emotional capacity to own up to the things that they've done and to move forward and to try and fix it. And if they realize that they made a mistake, if someone calls them out, they actually take the time to address it. And I find that most people do. Most guys do. People in general, like most men that I know, when they're called out for their actions for something that they've done, whether it was one thing or the other, or like the fact that it just purely hurt somebody that they didn't mean to hurt. Because, like I said, people don't go out there thinking like men don't go out every morning thinking, "Oh man, I'm gonna hurt my girlfriend or I'm gonna hurt this person." Like they don't do that. They don't. Their intention is never to hurt someone. But the mistake that they make, they might not have realized that it was gonna lead to that consequence. You know. So when someone does mention it to them and they do bring it up and they say, hey, like, I think you made this mistake, or hey, you hurt me when you did this or said that, they are going to go back and they are going to consider it and think about it. For my friends, if someone brings it up with them, at first they might be like, oh, like, at first their initial reaction might be, oh, but I didn't mean to, like, my intention wasn't that, so like, why are you getting upset? But then they'll bring it up to, for example, me later and say, hey, this person came up to me and they said that I hurt them, but I don't understand how that happened. And then we talk about it and we figure out, like, we have the conversation. We say, well, I think that it was because of this and that. Or what do you think, or what were you expecting? And so we just talk more in depth and we try and figure out more about, like, what happened, the current situation, like the past, the present, and the future. What happened, what are you doing right now, and what are you gonna do about it in the future?
So again, this is really encouraging to me. I'm excited that this is a reality for some men on the planet that and eh, it's not that I've never thought that men weren't capable. I'm rooting for men, just like I'm rooting for women. I'm rooting for all of us, but I just don't have a lot of insights into kind of the ins and outs and the daily interactions that men, and I think especially men in our culture, experience. And so it's really cool to know that men are talking. They're
Yeah,
talking through problems. They're talking through feelings and trying to figure out how to, gain insight and how to improve. That's huge.
it's
And so, yeah, I love it.
that's good. I mean, it's always difficult to talk to the people that you care about the most, you know?
Yes.
So it's like, usually I'm gonna go to like an outside perspective and then come back and then discuss it, because otherwise my head is like scattered. And so when I try to have the conversation and try and actually address it with the person that I want to fix it with, or even like, I might decide it doesn't need to be addressed or talked about, but I just now know that that's going to happen if I do that again. And so I just don't make the same mistake, because I've learned. Even if I don't talk about it with my partner or with my friend, I just, even if I don't, like, say, hey, I'm sorry that happened, I at least know, hey, this led to that. So I know what not to do, or I know to be more sensitive, or I know to say this or that better.
Right. Huh. Okay. And when you choose not to, when you choose it's not the right time, in your mind, you say it's not the right time to have this conversation. I know it needs to be addressed. How does the other person take that? Is there like is there a communication where you say, I can't talk about this right now, but can we plan to talk about it in a couple days? Is there actual, in your, from your own personal experience, do you have that communication, or do you just kind of, and I'm not saying this with any criticism, but do you just kind of
Mm-hmm.
leave it and let that person kind of do their thing, you do your thing, and then do you, I'm sure every situation is different, but just curious because I don't know what it's like
Yeah.
in those situations you just described. I'm curious what it's like for the other person. Do they know what's going on?
I mean, it really, I guess, depends on how the conversation plays out originally. Like, the
Mm,
initial conversation is really going to play a part because, you know, so I studied communication for a long time. And I think that a really important aspect to remember and to recognize is that the energy and the emotion that you put into confronting somebody about the way that they hurt you or they influenced you, that's going to get mirrored back to you. So and the thing is that when we communicate, the way that we can get our message across isn't by talking how we want to talk, but by talking in the way that they're going to understand the best way possible. So if I'm mad and I want to just like yell and say, I'm so upset with you, they're not going to learn. Like, that
mm,
the lesson isn't going to come across, because yelling comes from anger, and anger, I believe, is a mask behind a
Hmm.
deeper emotion. So instead of after I get hurt by something, instead of yelling and saying, "How could you do this to me?" I say, "Hey, like that really hurt. Where did that come from?" It's gonna harness a much better conversation than to just get upset or to come at someone from a different, more aggressive or harsh way. You know, the
Yeah.
one way like really welcomes conversation and says like, "Hey, like I want to understand you better." But then
Hmm.
it also goes down to different communication styles. Like one person that may like they may just have the personality that they're more aggressive and direct, and if you are a direct person and you're trying to have a direct conversation with someone who's much more sensitive, the person who's more sensitive may feel very hurt by your words, even if you don't mean them to be hurt, like hurtful. Like you can have the best intention in the world, the most love in your heart, but you just have different communication styles.
Absolutely. I didn't know this, that you studied communication. This makes a lot of sense in terms of who you are and how you operate and
Yeah.
why you would have been attracted maybe to communication studies. So you studied interpersonal communication and
Um,
mass or
we studied the I kind of all of the above. Like I took classes for it all.
hmm,
Public speaking was something that I found myself doing frequently within my classes. Like I studied debate, I studied public speaking, I studied mass communication, communication for the media, journalism and all that. And so my favorite was for sure interpersonal communication. Like I wanted to find out like how do you have the best um, conversation? Like what does it mean to have the best conversation, and how do you do that? And so the way that I found is the best way to converse with someone is to talk how they would receive it best, not to talk how you want to talk.
right.
So you really have to be a chameleon of sorts when you're having conversations,
Yes. That's
while
so
finding the balance and the bridge between being authentic, true to yourself, and also learning how to match their communication style. Which if it goes against like your own personal communication style, like it's opposite, it can really clash and create a just have it like it can lead to different things. And so when you're trying to explore and you're trying to learn better how to talk to someone or communicate with someone, there's gonna be arguments and fights along the way because you're just the message that you're sending is being received in a totally different way. And so you just have to kind of have that patience to understand that you're both learning how to talk better to each other. And that's all right.
so much wisdom and insight in that simple concept, which the chameleon part makes sense to me in terms of your acting background. And I'm
Yes.
curious as an actor because I've have a little knowledge of acting and the approach. And I understand that actors, just in general, theater, film, television, actors are supposed to not judge their characters, right? Because
Yes.
how are you going to truly embody this character if you don't like them or think that they made such a bad choice? You cannot, there's no way to completely immerse yourself if you've judged the character. So I'm curious from that standpoint how you as an actor have worked with that concept and also applied that maybe to your life outside of acting.
So I think that so I mean, as you stated, within like as an actor, you as an actor, one would have to address their character almost like a friend. And
Hmm.
so what you want to do is you want to entirely understand their story, their life story. So kind of going back to a thought that I mentioned earlier, no one wakes up in the morning, or very few people in this world. Very rarely is someone going to wake up in this morning and say, I want to do something bad today. I want to hurt people today. Like that's so unrealistic in my opinion. And so the way that acting was described to me by um, my teacher at Foothill College, Janice Bergman. She said that acting is that like every person is like a deck of cards. You know, the top few cards are the ones that are very easily accessible, and those are like friend, brother, son. Um, I work as a server, so like server, you know, restaurant worker, retail worker. You know, like the things that you like, your career, your education, the person that you are, and what you have are going to be at the top. But then, you know, every person in this world is capable of reaching those like deeper, darker parts of ourselves, but then they have to grow up in a certain way or have certain interactions that teach them that those things are okay. For example, if you're playing the part of, let's say, a cannibal, you have to understand the reason why cannibalism is okay. And maybe you were just raised and you know you grew up in a society where cannibalism was common. And so you just have to understand the idea behind why, like the reasoning behind their minds and that society's mindset. And so bringing that to my day to day, I'm not a cannibal,
Thank
but
you.
bringing that to my day to day life is that the people that I interact with that have hurt me or have I feel have wronged me or um, even when I make a mistake myself, I have to recognize and understand that chances are they were not trying to hurt me. And I know I wasn't trying to hurt anybody else. I wasn't actively thinking like I'm gonna do this evil act because it's not right. It's not just. And so what I do is um, I try and be more empathetic and try to understand better where they were coming from or if I feel like I made a mistake or I feel like I've hurt someone, I try to understand better where I came from and how I can modify that going forward. And so within acting, like you have to fully understand the entire life story. And so that goes down to having a huge level of empathy
Mhm.
where you understand why people speak a certain way, act a certain way, interact a certain way. And so with that, that's really I feel it's really transferred into my personal life where I have that curiosity. I want to know your story. I want to know where you came from. I want to know like why you interact certain ways or how you led to this way or I love stories and hearing stories and just understanding how people work better.
Yes. And that makes sense why that would help a person or give them more of an inclination to want to communicate, want to share, want to understand other people. That seems to serve you well in a lot of ways in your life. So I'm so glad.
Good, definitely. And I'm very uh, you know the interactions that I've had and the way that you know like my family is amazing. I love my family entirely. And I really couldn't be the person that I am today without all the interactions that I've had with them growing up.
Beautiful. Well, is there anything else that you thought would be important to add before we wrap up?
Mm,
Again, this is about shame. I'm trying to really promote, to encourage us to move away from operating from a place of shame and
I
focusing on
think
growth and just moving forward, and learning.
I think trying to I mean, my advice to anyone and everyone is to try and understand the intention of where somebody came from before responding with their initial response. Because when someone does come up to confront you, it might be terrifying. They might not know how to confront you or discuss something, and so they might not have the right words at first. So just try and understand better to create a conversation. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, that's what protests are about, for example, is creating the conversation. And so even though like certain ways might be more harsh than others, like people are hurt. They're trying to get a message across. They're trying to use some means of communication, and if one way isn't working, they try a different one. So my advice to all, and kind of like finish off, is to try to understand.
Sounds perfect. Well, Jacob, the way I end each podcast is I ask my guest which television show, new or old, do you recommend and why?
I love the TV show Supernatural. I
Say that one
recommend
more
that one.
time.
I recommend Supernatural, the TV show.
Oh, WCW.
CW, yeah, the CW's TV show. The reason why I recommend it, especially pertaining to this, because your question to me, which I mean, I have a very different, I guess, interpretation than how one would typically see shame, but um, a lot of the questions that you've had and can be observed through Supernatural, it's about two
Oh,
men who have to deal with a harsh reality of life that no one else can understand. And so then they're brothers, and they have to understand like how to interact with the world around them and have to deal with so much weight on their shoulders as they move forward throughout the entire series.
very cool. Yes. I've never watched it. I've heard of it. I will
Highly
I will
recommend.
look for
Highly
it.
recommend.
Okay.